The hearing room hummed with tension before a single word was spoken. Cameras panned, microphones gleamed, and every seat was filled with the weight of a divided nation watching its reflection through two people about to collide. Jim Jordan leaned forward, lips pressed into a smirk that spoke louder than his voice ever could. Jasmine Crockett sat still, eyes steady, the kind of stillness that makes noise nervous. The chairman's gavel struck once, sharp, metallic, final. Jordan seized the moment. "Madam, you're out of line," he barked, cutting through the air like a blade meant to remind her of rank. A ripple of chuckles floated from his side of the aisle. Crockett didn't move. She blinked once, her chin tilting slightly, the calm defiance of someone who's seen louder rooms than this. The exchange was supposed to be routine political theater, another sparring match for social media clips. But the air in that room shifted. It wasn't just disagreement anymore. It was a test of dignity under fire. Crockett began to speak, her tone smooth, deliberate, refusing to rise to the bait. Jordan interrupted again, then again. Every interjection felt heavier, echoing centuries of attempts to shrink women down to silence. Somewhere, a staffer's phone buzzed, with live comments already rolling in. Why won't they let her finish? She's too calm for their comfort. The sound of typing fingers joined the chorus of murmurs in the chamber. Then came the moment, the pause before everything changed. Crockett leaned toward her microphone, her voice almost a whisper, but cutting through the static. "If the truth makes you uncomfortable, Congressman, that's not my problem." The laughter died instantly. Even Jordan's smirk faltered for half a heartbeat. The gavel hesitated mid-air, as if the very room was waiting to exhale. For a fraction of a second, history hung between them, power meeting poise, arrogance staring down grace. Outside, the live feed counter spiked. Clips were already being clipped, captions already forming. But inside, silence stretched long enough to make even the loudest remember how fragile noise can be. They thought she'd fold. They thought they could talk over her. They had no idea what was coming next. By the time the first clip of that exchange hit social media, the hearing wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a mirror. Across living rooms and offices, phones lit up with the moment Jim Jordan's voice cut through Jasmine Crockett's again and again, until one calm sentence flipped the script. It wasn't just about oversight or policy now. It was about power. Who gets to hold the mic and who has to fight to be heard? Cable panels scrambled for context. Some called it just politics. But people knew better. They saw something raw beneath the parliamentary language, a struggle older than any committee. One side talked over, the other stood taller. One shouted, the other breathed. It was America arguing with itself one more time. Crockett's composure became the lightning rod. For some, it was unsettling. A woman who didn't yell, didn't storm out, and didn't play the part expected of her. For others, it was magnetic. They recognized that tone. It was the sound of someone used to explaining themselves twice before anyone listened once. As the debate replayed on loop, clips flooded TikTok, Reels, and stitched reactions. A teenage girl in Atlanta mouthed along to Crockett's line, "That's not my problem." A teacher in Houston tweeted, "My students watched that clip in silence." Hashtags rose like a tide. Hashtag let her speak. Hashtag Crockett unbothered. Hashtag dignity wins. In the committee room, however, the cameras kept rolling, capturing the uneasy shuffle of lawmakers who suddenly didn't know where to look. The energy had shifted, subtly, unmistakably. When power is built on intimidation, composure becomes rebellion. Meanwhile, Jordan doubled down. He leaned back, arms crossed, the practiced confidence of a man who'd built a brand on confrontation. But even through the television screen, viewers sensed it. His voice was louder, yes, but his control was slipping. This wasn't the first time a man in power tried to shrink a woman with interruption, but it might be the first time, live and unedited, the whole country noticed what that shrinking sounds like. The contrast was cinematic, his words hitting like hammer strikes, hers landing like precision glass. For years, people had said politics was broken because no one listened. Now they were watching, finally understanding why. And yet, beyond outrage, something else stirred. A quiet recognition. Viewers weren't just angry for her, they were remembering their own moments. The meeting where their idea got rephrased by someone louder. The classroom where their accent turned heads before their point landed. Jasmine had become more than a congresswoman. She was a mirror for every person who'd been told their calm was weakness. As the clip passed 1 million views, the networks scrambled for both sides panels. But the comment sections told a different story. This isn't about sides, one user wrote. It's about tone. Another added, he lost the moment she didn't flinch. Inside the room, Crockett adjusted her notes, unbothered. She didn't need to raise her voice. She'd already raised the standard. The gavel came down again, but this time its echo felt hollow, like an ending no one was convinced of. And somewhere, beneath the buzz of phones and flashing cameras, a single truth began to take shape. The more they tried to drown her out, the more the silence started to sound like strength. But before the public could pick sides, the cameras caught something no one expected. A look in her eyes that said, clear as daylight, I'm not done yet. Long before this hearing, Jim Jordan had built a reputation as the loudest man in every room. To his supporters, that was strength, the kind of brash confidence that bulldozes bureaucracy. To his critics, it was theater, designed to drown out nuance. But on that day, under the sterile glare of congressional lighting, his signature tactic, interruption as intimidation, met its limit. He wasn't just speaking to Jasmine Crockett. He was performing for the cameras, for the headlines, for the base that expected fireworks instead of facts. Years of committee brawls had trained him to equate decibels with dominance. Each raised eyebrow, each pointed finger, each "Madam, let me finish" was a move from a well-worn playbook. Control the frame, and you control the story. But the problem with routines is that they crumble when the other player doesn't follow the script. Crockett didn't match his energy. She inverted it. Her calm became a mirror, forcing his aggression to echo back on itself. For the first time in a long time, Jim Jordan looked like a man shouting into silence and realizing the silence was winning. Still, he pressed on, reciting talking points with the practiced rhythm of a boxer throwing jabs into the air. He interrupted, redirected, demanded, trying to force the old dynamic back into place. The louder he got, the smaller his control became. Every time Crockett held her ground, the performance cracked. The audience watching online began to sense it too. He wasn't debating anymore. He was flailing. To understand this moment, you have to understand the kind of politics Jordan represents, the era of televised aggression, of turning hearings into viral clips, of governing through spectacle. He came from a time when being feared looked like being strong. But this wasn't the early 2000s anymore. The crowd had changed. The audience now saw arrogance for what it was, insecurity in a suit. And the irony? For a man who prided himself on control, he never saw how quickly the narrative would slip through his fingers. The smirk that once symbolized swagger began to look like a mask cracking under pressure. The hearing wasn't about oversight anymore. It was about exposure, a live unraveling of the myth that volume equals authority. As his voice rose, Crockett remained still, not defiant, just present. And presence, it turns out, is louder than noise. You could see it in his body language. The slight lean forward, the tightening jaw, the eyes darting toward the chairman as if to say, "Get her under control." But no gavel could undo what had already happened. The audience wasn't watching him the way they used to. They weren't impressed. They were analyzing. Memes had already started forming, his outbursts looped beside captions like, "The louder they shout, the less they hear." What he thought was dominance had become a display of desperation. In a single session, Jordan became the embodiment of a political archetype past its expiration date. The man who mistakes aggression for leadership, who believes interrupting a woman will stop her from being right. But this time, the silence that followed didn't validate his victory. It exposed his insecurity. There's a moment every performer dreads, when the audience stops reacting and starts judging. That's when applause turns to quiet. And that's where Jim Jordan found himself, in the quiet. Surrounded by cameras, microphones, and millions of watching eyes that no longer bought the act. The scene closes with a close-up. Jordan glancing down at his papers, realizing the energy has shifted. He clears his throat, adjusts his tie, and tries again to speak. But the tone has changed. The power dynamic has flipped. For the first time that day, he doesn't sound like a man in control. He sounds like a man trying to remember what control felt like. And as he leans into the mic one more time, determined to reclaim the moment, Jasmine Crockett lifts her gaze, not defiant, not even amused, just ready. Because for every raised voice, there comes a reckoning. And as Jordan raised his for the final time, Jasmine raised something far more powerful, her composure. Before she was a congresswoman sitting under the sharp glare of cameras, Jasmine Crockett was a public defender walking into courtrooms where the stakes were measured in years, not headlines. She learned early that volume doesn't win cases, facts do. And facts, when spoken with conviction, don't need to shout. That discipline, that slow burn of composure, had been forged long before Jim Jordan ever tried to talk over her. She came from the kind of Texas streets that teach you two things: how to read people fast and how to never let them see you flinch. Her story was stitched together by long nights studying law after shifts, by clients who couldn't afford anyone else, by the quiet determination of someone who'd seen justice tilted but refused to accept it as permanent. Every dismissal, every sneer, every "calm down, young lady," was a rehearsal for this stage. When she arrived in Congress, she didn't come to blend in. She came with a promise to be as unbothered as she was unbowed. Yet the institution she entered was built on interruption. The unwritten rules had been clear for generations. Power speaks loudly, and women, especially women who look like her, are expected to yield. But Jasmine never did. She carried the rhythm of resistance in her voice, each word deliberate, every pause purposeful. So when Jordan leaned in that day, raising his voice to crowd out hers, something old flickered behind her calm expression. A memory, maybe, of the first time someone tried to dismiss her in a courtroom, or the first time a professor questioned how she got in. She had heard that tone before, and she had outlasted it every single time. Her calm wasn't submission, it was strategy. Crockett understood something her opponents didn't. Silence can be a weapon. She let him speak, let him fill the air with noise until it began to echo back on him. Then, when the moment was ripe, she would reclaim it with precision. Every word she hadn't said was waiting, sharp, measured, necessary. There was power in her stillness. Cameras caught it, viewers felt it. It was the difference between reaction and command. Every time she paused, the audience leaned in closer. Every time he interrupted, she gained more ground without lifting a finger. The calm before the clapback wasn't emptiness, it was momentum gathering in plain sight. Her background had trained her for exactly this dynamic. As a defense attorney, she'd often been the only black woman in rooms filled with older white men who doubted her every word. She learned to pace herself, to let arrogance dig its own hole before dropping a single devastating sentence into it. Her mother used to tell her, "Don't argue with fools, they'll make you sound like one." That lesson wasn't just wisdom, it was armor. Inside the hearing, her voice was steady, but her pulse was fire. You could almost see her calculating how much to let pass, when to interject, where to land her words so they'd leave marks that couldn't be ignored. She wasn't trying to win a moment, she was trying to win the narrative. Outside, the clips kept spreading. Commentators started noticing the subtlety of her strategy. She's not fighting back, she's letting him overplay his hand. It was restraint as revolution, elegance as counterattack. For a woman who had built her life on defending the voiceless, this was more than a debate. It was vindication. She turned every stereotype of angry and uncontrolled on its head by showing that power doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes it just has to stand still while arrogance unravels itself. At that table, Jasmine wasn't just representing herself. She was carrying everyone who had been told they were too emotional, too loud, too unqualified. Every time Jordan interrupted, he wasn't just interrupting her, he was interrupting generations of dignity that had fought to exist in rooms like this. And she knew it. That's what made her stillness so electric. It wasn't fear, it was memory, responsibility, resolve. The crowd watching online didn't know her full story, but they felt it. They saw a woman who refused to shrink. They saw professionalism weaponized against provocation. They saw history rewritten in real time, not through fury, but through control. Her eyes stayed locked on him as he leaned closer, voice climbing. The gavel struck again, the noise surged, but she didn't move. Somewhere deep inside, a truth hummed like a steady heartbeat. They can take the mic, but they can't take my voice. Because every time someone tried to silence her, they only ended up amplifying what she stood for. So when Jordan pointed, barked, and tried once more to assert himself as the authority in the room, Jasmine simply adjusted her papers, inhaled quietly, and prepared her reply. Every insult had been logged, every interruption tallied, and the longer he spoke, the stronger her silence became. Because this wasn't the climax, it was the inhale before the storm. And when she finally exhaled, every word she had been saving would land like truth breaking through static. The calm before the clapback was almost over. The hearing room had become an echo chamber of tension, each word ricocheting off walls lined with history. Jim Jordan's voice rose first, sharp, impatient, rehearsed. "Madam, we've already covered this." His tone dripped with practiced authority, the sound of someone used to steamrolling resistance. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She adjusted her microphone, her calm almost unnerving. "Actually, Congressman," she began softly, "what we've covered is you interrupting me." The crowd behind the camera stirred, sensing the spark. Jordan pounced again, louder this time, trying to drown her out. The chairman's gavel hit wood once, twice, futile percussion against the escalating rhythm. Every attempt to silence her only amplified her presence. Crockett didn't match his volume, she matched his certainty. Each sentence she managed to deliver came like a well-aimed arrow, landing exactly where it hurt. Twitter lit up instantly. She's handling him like a law professor dismantling a freshman. Unbothered, iconic. The feed became a stream of digital applause, memes forming before her sentence even ended. But inside the room, there was no laughter, only tension so tight it hummed. Jordan leaned forward, voice trembling with frustration disguised as control. "Madam, I'm reclaiming my time." Crockett cut in, calm but firm. "You can reclaim your time, Congressman. You can't reclaim your tone." The silence after that line was almost cinematic. Even the chairman hesitated. Crockett had done what few ever managed. She disrupted his rhythm. His signature tactic, the barrage of sound meant to overwhelm, had collided with composure that refused to yield. The louder he grew, the smaller his authority became. Narrator's voice threads through the moment. There's a difference between control and composure. One demands attention, the other earns it. Jordan spoke again, but something had changed. The pitch was different, the pauses longer. He wasn't speaking to her anymore. He was speaking around her, trying to regain ground he no longer held. Crockett listened, then responded with a tone that could slice glass. If the purpose of this hearing is truth, then interruptions are the enemy of it. Somewhere in the back, a journalist scribbled the quote, already imagining the headline. Cameras zoomed in closer, Crockett's face still, Jordan's flushed. The power dynamic had quietly inverted. What made it gripping wasn't rage, it was restraint. Her calm turned into an indictment, every pause louder than his next line. Even his allies began shifting in their seats, sensing that his usual dominance was slipping. By now, the country was divided into two feeds, one cheering her poise, the other scrambling to frame it as disrespect. But both kept watching. Every second of this verbal crossfire was theater and truth rolled into one, a rare moment when authenticity cut through political noise. Jordan threw one last jab, half sneer, half stammer. "You seem awfully defensive for someone who says she's calm." Crockett didn't even blink. "And you seem awfully loud for someone who says he's in control." That line wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It landed with the precision of a gavel meant for judgment, not order. Even the microphones seemed to lean closer, hungry for whatever came next. The gavel struck again, signaling order that had long left the room. But the control Jordan once owned now belonged entirely to the woman he tried to silence. The narrator returns, voice low, deliberate. "In politics, as in life, the real battle isn't over who speaks, it's over who's heard." And in that instant, it was clear. The man who prided himself on volume had finally met someone who didn't need it. Outside the building, the sky began to darken, the kind of late afternoon gray that mirrors a turning tide. Inside, Jasmine Crockett gathered her notes, a quiet half-smile forming. Not victory, just readiness. Because this wasn't the end of the hearing. It was the beginning of the reckoning. And then, right as Jordan opened his mouth to fire back, she looked up, steady, fearless. The room held its breath. And then she struck. When Jasmine Crockett finally spoke, the silence beforehand was its own kind of drum roll. The audience, the committee, the millions watching online, everyone leaned in. Her voice came slow, deliberate. Every word dipped in composure and conviction. "Mr. Chairman," she began, "I know some people think loudness is leadership, but where I come from, we were taught that real strength whispers and still gets heard." A few heads turned. Someone coughed. Jim Jordan tried to interrupt, but his timing faltered. Crockett continued, undeterred. "You keep saying I'm angry, but what I am is awake. I see the double standard. I see how some of you can shout and pound tables and still be called passionate. Yet when a Black woman raises her voice, suddenly it's a rant." The room didn't move. It couldn't. She wasn't shouting. She was testifying. Every syllable carried the weight of generations who'd been told to calm down when all they were doing was telling the truth. The walls seemed to close in, as if history itself had pulled up a chair to listen. Jordan's mouth opened, then closed again. There was nothing in his playbook for this moment. The camera zoomed in. Crockett's gaze never left him. "You can try to silence me, Congressman, but every time you do, you prove why my voice is needed here." And that's when the room cracked open. Murmurs, gasps, a gavel that couldn't stop the applause from the gallery. Someone whispered, "She said it." Another said, "She meant it." Jordan leaned back, flustered, searching for his script. This isn't about... It is. It's always about who gets to speak and who's told to sit down. The line spread like wildfire. Within minutes, it was trending. Hashtags bloomed across social media. Hashtag let her speak. Hashtag Crockett was right. Hashtag strength in stillness. Cable news anchors replayed the moment frame by frame. Analysts tried to spin it. Some called it grandstanding, others historic. But everyone agreed on one thing. The energy in that hearing shifted permanently. In living rooms across the country, people watched not a politician, but a woman standing in her full power. Immigrants saw themselves in her unshaken voice. Young activists replayed her words on loop. And somewhere, a little girl with brown skin and bright eyes whispered to herself, "One day, that'll be me." Back in the room, Jordan tried to salvage authority with sarcasm. "Well, congratulations," he muttered. "You've gone viral." Crockett smiled faintly. "I didn't come here to go viral, Congressman. I came here to be visible." That single word, visible, hung in the air like a declaration. No rebuttal could touch it. The tension that once belonged to Jordan now wrapped around Crockett like armor. The hearing continued, but the energy had flipped completely. Every interruption after that felt weaker, more desperate. Every jab met a wall of eloquence too composed to crumble. Narrator's voice layered over the moment. For too long, power mistook politeness for weakness. But on this day, poise became protest. By the time the hearing adjourned, the internet had crowned its verdict. Comment sections filled with fire emojis, praise, and disbelief at how effortlessly she dismantled years of bias with nothing but calm clarity. Outside the Capitol, reporters swarmed her, shouting questions. "Congresswoman, how did you stay so composed?" She smiled again, the same faint, unbothered smile. Because when you know who you are, their noise can't touch you. As she walked down the marble steps, the sun broke through the clouds, a soft golden light glinting off the cameras following her. In the echo of her footsteps, America heard more than defiance. It heard a warning wrapped in grace. The storm wasn't over. It had just begun to listen. By nightfall, the entire country was talking about one moment. The moment Jasmine Crockett turned calm into a weapon. News networks played it in slow motion. The raised eyebrow, the steady breath, the line that cut through the noise like scripture. "You can try to silence me, Congressman, but every time you do, you prove why my voice is needed here." It wasn't just a quote anymore. It was a movement. On Twitter, hashtags swirled like wildfire. Crockett versus Jordan. Let her speak. Grace under fire. Within hours, her clip hit 10 million views. Edits rolled in with cinematic music, slow zooms, captions in bold red. Commentators called it the moment's composure conquered chaos. Late-night hosts cracked jokes at Jordan's expense. Even those who normally ignored politics reposted the exchange with one caption: "This is how you handle disrespect." Meanwhile, Jordan's camp scrambled. Conservative pundits tried to frame it as overreaction, but their talking points fell flat. Every attempt to discredit her only amplified her poise. On TikTok, creators stitched his interruptions with her calm responses, side by side, a split screen of arrogance meeting dignity. She didn't raise her voice because she didn't need to, one viral video said. Crockett's staff barely kept up with requests, morning shows, podcasts, invitations from universities, civil rights leaders calling her a masterclass in controlled power. Yet through it all, she stayed grounded. No gloating, no victory lap, just the same quiet confidence that started the storm. In a small Texas cafe, a group of women huddled around a phone, replaying the clip over coffee refills. "That's what I'm talking about," one said, voice trembling. She didn't just speak for herself, she spoke for all of us who've been talked over. Across the country, teachers played it in classrooms. Debate coaches analyzed it frame by frame. Activists used it in workshops about presence and patience. A headline on The Atlantic read, "When Stillness Becomes Resistance." But while the praise poured in, so did the backlash. Trolls flooded her mentions. Commentators sneered that she was playing victim. Others mocked her tone, her expression, her very right to be composed. It was the oldest play in the book. When you can't win the argument, you question the woman who won it. Still, something was different this time. People clapped back before she even had to. Strangers filled her mentions with defense and gratitude. "Don't worry, Congresswoman," one wrote. "We heard every word they tried to talk over." Cable news rolled the footage again that evening, cutting between Crockett's calm face and Jordan's frustrated interruptions. The host asked, was this a defining moment in modern congressional history? The panel didn't agree, but the audience did. Outside the political bubble, the cultural echo was deafening. Poets wrote about it, musicians sampled her line into songs, artists painted murals, her microphone glowing like a torch. She became more than a congresswoman. She was a symbol of every person who ever stayed quiet until silence itself became strength. In one viral clip, a young girl looked into her camera and said, "Miss Crockett, I showed my mom your video. She said, 'That's how you keep your crown straight while they throw stones. Thank you.'" Meanwhile, Jordan remained unusually silent. No public remarks, no fiery rebuttals, just avoidance. His silence, ironically, was the loudest confirmation that he'd lost control of the story. The next morning, newspapers carried two photos side by side. Jordan mid-interruption, jaw tense. Crockett mid-response, serene. The caption read, "Power, redefined." And somewhere deep in the Capitol, behind closed doors, aides whispered about what had just shifted. She changed the tone of the whole thing, one admitted. They won't underestimate her again. But Crockett wasn't done. The hearing had ended, yes, but the conversation she started was only beginning. Her words echoed through social feeds, classrooms, community halls, and dinner tables. Because this wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about the audacity to stay composed in a system built to make you break. And as the clip replayed for the 100th time that night, one commentator said what millions were already thinking. She didn't just win an argument, she changed the rules. But even then, no one knew the ripple was still spreading. Something bigger was coming, a moment that would turn admiration into movement. And when it arrived, America would never forget who started it. By the time the outrage faded and the applause quieted, something deeper remained. The clip had burned through timelines, but what lingered wasn't just the drama, it was the meaning behind it. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just handled an outburst. She'd rewritten the terms of respect in real time. In the days that followed, pundits tried to box her moment into politics as usual. But ordinary people saw something far more profound. A young woman in Detroit posted, "That hearing wasn't about a law. It was about who gets to have a voice in America." A veteran from Georgia wrote, "She reminded me what grace under fire looks like. That's what we fought for." Crockett herself stayed mostly silent. She didn't flood the airwaves or soak in the spotlight. When she finally spoke to reporters, her words were soft but certain. Sometimes when they talk over you, you don't need to shout. You just need to keep speaking truth until the noise gets tired. It wasn't just a response. It was a philosophy. And it landed with people who'd long felt unseen. Immigrant parents who'd been dismissed for their accents, women who'd been told to smile while being interrupted, workers who'd been ignored in meetings. Each saw a reflection of themselves in her steadiness. The narrative had flipped. Jim Jordan's aggression now looked small against Crockett's poise. His interruptions were rewatched as artifacts of insecurity, while her composure became a symbol of discipline and dignity. "The louder they get," one columnist wrote, "the more she proves why calm is revolutionary." In classrooms and podcasts, the debate evolved into something moral, even spiritual. What is strength really? Is it volume or clarity? Is it dominance or presence? Crockett had answered those questions without intending to. She showed that sometimes resistance isn't fire, it's restraint. And America noticed. A week later, as she stood on the Capitol steps for another press briefing, someone in the crowd shouted, "We're proud of you." She looked up, smiled, and simply said, "Keep standing tall." That clip went viral too, not because of confrontation this time, but because of calm assurance. Commentators called it a new kind of power, not performative, not angry, but rooted, intentional, unstoppable. It wasn't about shouting down opponents anymore. It was about outlasting them with truth. By the time the headlines moved on, the story had already become folklore. College students quoted her in commencement speeches. Faith leaders referenced her in sermons about dignity. Artists painted murals of her face beside the words, "Stay still, speak loud." In a country addicted to outrage, she'd offered something radical, composure as rebellion. And beneath all the noise, a quiet question began to rise, one that wouldn't fade after the views and the hashtags disappeared. What if this is what power is supposed to look like? Because when the yelling ends and the cameras stop rolling, what remains isn't who shouted the loudest, it's who stood their ground without losing their soul. And on that day, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate. She reminded America that dignity is louder than any gavel. But even as her words settled into the nation's conscience, another storm was already brewing, one that would test whether her message could outlast the moment. The calm before the next reckoning had begun. The hearing was over, but its echo refused to die. Clips still circulated, stitched with quotes and music that turned a moment of tension into a modern anthem. In living rooms, on campuses, across continents, people who had never heard of Jasmine Crockett now spoke her name like a reminder. Grace has gravity. In her next public address, she didn't gloat. She didn't even mention Jim Jordan. Instead, she spoke directly to the people who saw themselves in her steadiness. "You don't have to match their volume to prove your worth," she said. Voice calm, steady. "You just have to remember who you are, no matter how loud they get." Her words landed like a prayer disguised as politics. Comment sections filled with stories, immigrants sharing memories of being dismissed for their accent, young women recalling times they'd been talked over, men admitting they'd learned more from her restraint than from any shouting match they'd ever seen. Then came the call to action. Not shouted, but offered. If you believe in what we just witnessed, then don't just share the clip. Share the courage. Be the calm that changes the room. Her voice faded, but her presence lingered. The camera panned out, her silhouette framed by the marble columns of Congress, sunlight spilling across the floor. Narrator's voice. Some moments burn out in the heat of outrage. Others keep glowing, quietly, until they light something bigger. And as the screen faded to black, the final line appeared in white. Dignity is not silence. It's power unbothered. Then one last beat of silence before the outro music rose. If you believe in that kind of power, subscribe, because this is just the beginning.